if you wanted to really help 8 billion people grapple with the world of AI, then you needed to help the 150 million educators and instructors out there to help the 8 billion.
How do you keep a 180 years old company relevant? This is something that Pearson has done time and again, and is doing it again today. I'm Ernesto Pagano, and this is Bold Moves in TMT. Our guest is Omar Abbosh, CEO of Pearson. From its beginning as a construction company to a famous publisher to a major force in education, Pearson has reinvented itself multiple times. Omar, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
You took over as Pearson CEO over 2 years ago. When you stepped into the role, what kind of a situation did you find?
When I studied Pearson before joining, I wanted to understand what did its people think and what did its customers think. And what I found in the people is a group who are extremely mission-driven. They care enormously about the heart of what Pearson is, which is helping people learn. That's it. And that is a very easy way to enlist people because they love and care about the purpose and the mission of the company. From a customer point of view, actually, for the 35 years before I joined Pearson, I'd been in customer services type roles. And I was astonished to find how Pearson's customers really admired and liked and supported the company in a way that was different from what I'd seen before. The brand was wholesome, it was trusted, and its focus on quality and the assessment of standards and holding and measuring standards was something that was amazingly supportive coming from customers. Now, on the other side of the coin, I think what we also found was a company that, having been through a very tough period from about 2012 to 2022, you've found a lot of people who were beaten down. It had several profit warnings and therefore many rifts and restructurings. And so I think people were tired from that. And my predecessor, in order to get control of the company, had put all of the operations into 5 clear business unit structures, which actually did stabilize things. But at the same time, it created a set of silos within the business. So people were not really aware of what each other were doing. And in this era of technology and AI, duplicating and repeating stuff in the different areas was probably not so helpful. So essentially, we found a business that behaved more like a holding company than an operating company.
And once you were there, so what excited you about the opportunity ahead, and what worried you the most about the change that you had to implement?
Before I went to Pearson, I was at Microsoft, and I was responsible for Microsoft's commercial business around the world. And our teams at the time were busy implementing AI, for example, in big financial institutions. And so the thing that really struck me as I studied the whole AI wave was there are not many industries that could be more helped by AI than education and learning. And I felt that if you wanted to really help 8 billion people grapple with the world of AI, then you needed to help the 150 million educators and instructors out there to help the 8 billion. And that's what Pearson does. It literally supports the educators and teachers and instructors around the world. And I wanted to see how do we use AI in a very effective way for that, for learning around the world. And that is at the heart of what excited me and it still excites me completely today. From a challenge point of view, when I did my early assessments and talked to a lot of people and spent time with individuals from the board down deep in the company, I got 2 things that I realized were going to be challenging. One was the company had suffered from strategic drift. It was unclear, actually, really what its locus of focus should be, what its strategic center should be. And secondly, there was a lot of doubt about the operating model and whether the operating model was able to generate the kind of performance that the company needed for the future. And so those 2 things obviously are meaningful lifts, and that's obviously what we're deep involved with right now.
Great, so let's go deeper on these 2 topics. You talked about strategy and operating model. Tell us, what did you do on both dimensions that allowed you to accelerate the pace of change? What were the bold moves that you made early in the days to make sure that Pearson was on the right path?
I mean, as you know, Ernesto, a company is a complicated thing at one level. So you've got 17,000 people, you have products in 200 countries, you have offices in 60 countries, you have the broadest spectrum of products and services across education and learning, I think of certainly any publicly listed company in the world. And so at some levels it looks fairly complex. And actually when I looked under the hood, what I found is Pearson wasn't actually 5 P&Ls. It was more like 25 P&Ls. And that degree of fragmentation was problematic. because it meant that people were chasing priorities within their silos and being as effective as they can, but perhaps not solving, the big problems. And one of my colleagues has this lovely phrase that she says is that we're often green in silo and red end to end. And that is true in terms of when you look at operating performance, at processes and things like that, things wouldn't operate the way they should. So realization number one is that we had to move from being a holding company with a series of portfolio companies to a genuinely unified operating company. That has a whole load of implications. And that was, a very big part of the thrust that we're on. The second part around the strategy side of it is to say, well, actually, at one level, you need to see what Pearson actually is. And Pearson's core business, and people hadn't fully understood this, is assessments and verification, the measurement of human skills. It is verification infrastructure for the world. More than 67% of our revenues come from that. A meaningful higher number on profitability comes from that. And that's the core business. And then you have growth vectors where actually I can use AI to get to the next version, next generation of education. I can use AI to help solve problems in early careers. And we can use AI for enterprise skilling, but all building off that core business of assessments and verification. And that is essentially the heart of the strategy. And we co-created that with the top leaders. I think they feel it, they believe it. People are very clear now about who does what, how our operating model is in service of that. And, we're on a journey.
A couple of times you mentioned that when you started, you found Pearson being a holding company of several businesses and many P&Ls. And you're trying to shift from a holding concept towards an operating concept. How are you doing that? And in the day-by-day experience of your employees, how does that feel? How is it different?
Yeah, so honestly, we could talk a day about this one topic, but I'll try and be succinct. So Pearson was built up with a lot of M&A. So if you go back to the days of Marjorie Scordino, the company was truly a conglomerate, like a proper conglomerate. We owned Madame Tussauds, we owned Chateau Latour, we owned a stake in Lazard's Bank, and of course The Economist and Penguin Random House and the FT. So that was a conglomerate. And so the people who were at the top of the company actually were promoted through the ranks of finance and M&A. Those are not operators. They're amazingly smart finance people, sometimes strategists, but not typically operators. So to make the shift to the operating company, we had to think about, firstly, leadership. How do I have a set of leaders who have either deep customer instincts or deep product instincts? If you don't have that in the front, then you're not operating. And so that's part of the shift. Secondly, when you, as I mentioned earlier, you have these 25 different P&Ls which are born of an M&A journey, they often were living on totally separate processes, totally different career architectures, totally different tech stacks. So you end up with a proliferation of suppliers. You have nothing strategic going on in terms of how you partner in the outside world. So, for example, I think we had more than 700 marketing agency type support for this reasonably modest-sized company. We had more than 60 systems integration providers for a company of our size. To me, none of that makes any sense. So you can go through a much harder consolidation of that, but actually to build much deeper relationships with your partners who you need to help accelerate the business. We had social media marketing teams by unit. Like, why do we need that? We had different event planning teams by unit. And one of the things that obviously makes so much sense in the world of education and learning today is it's all digital and AI. But we had completely different software and product engineering approaches everywhere and a whole proliferation of tools in those spaces. Makes no sense. So to move to an operating company, you used to have to harmonize on these approaches. And so those are all the things that we're going super deep on across every unit. Now, what is probably the biggest difference for our people is in the past, when you lived in one of the 25 little silos, you literally couldn't see what was happening elsewhere. Therefore, you wouldn't have career opportunities to move because even the language of what your role was, what your titles were completely different. We had 5,500 titles for our people. We had hundreds and hundreds of roles, 1,500 roles for our people in a company of just 17,000 people. And so actually harmonizing to a single career architecture, helping people say, well, actually, these are the levels, these are the expectations of the roles, this is a go-to-market career path, this is a product career path, this is a learning and content development career path. That allows you to create movement of careers and allows us to create career pathways for our people. And that should be one of the biggest differences for our folks.
Sounds like a lot of hard work to do that. Something that they should have done maybe earlier, before you joined, but at some point it has to be done.
Companies are always in flux, always moving and always changing. And I think Pearson has been doing a lot of that, as you said beforehand. Over 182 years, it pivoted many, many times. And this is just the latest sequence. I think we've had a change arc to become more of an education and learning company for the world. And now we want to be the leading lifelong learning company in the world. And that's the shift that we're making now.
So let's talk about that. And one of the quotes that has captured my attention from you has been that you see the role of the CEO also as the role as the Chief Learning Officer. So tell us more about what do you mean with that?
Okay, so this is a bit of a story, so if I can unpack it a little bit. So every CEO knows that they have to do something with AI. AI, I believe, will fundamentally change every single industry, most processes, most jobs over the next 10 years. In a very profound way. I don't believe in the doom story of the AI job apocalypse. I think that's a load of nonsense coming out of Silicon Valley. But I do think there'll be a major reconfiguration, a rewiring of jobs and roles. So then you ask yourself, well, what does that look like? It actually looks like re-engineering in the 1990s, where you go at a very profound and deep way to say, actually, these new tools are unbelievably powerful. How do I put them to use? So I need to, yes, find the AI. Yes, I need to set the data foundation. Yes, I need to integrate it into my IT estate with the right security and the right integrations with all the existing technologies I have there. Yes, I need to rewire the processes. Sure, I need to rethink the roles of our people where AI can automate certain tasks within a job, but unlikely to automate a whole job. But now people have to work with agents. And the long pole in the tent, as you know, is always the people. It's never the technology. And so you have to bring the people with you. So the reskilling and learning journey is enormous that is in front of us. And I don't think CEOs can delegate that. If they want to get ROI from AI, you cannot delegate that to learning and development. Traditional L&D is buried somewhere in HR. Oftentimes it's a compliance checkbox type function. And at its best, it's like presenting content to people. That's not the same as learning. To really get into getting your organization to adopt this AI at scale, to reconfigure the roles and the processes, you need to bring the people with you. And that is literally a CEO level job. And so the CEO has to think hard about, actually, how do I help people learn? How do I help them thrive in this era? How do I equip them to be successful in this era? How do I overcome the fears? How do I overcome the resistance? How do I drive motivation? And how do I empower them to, as the tech folks would say, 10x themselves in this era where they can elevate with a load of AI agents and actually perform better, faster, cheaper than before. And that's the journey in front of us. I think all companies are going to have to go through that. And that's why the CEO is the Chief Learning Officer.
So let's build on what you just said around how the CEO needs to take a strong role in helping organizations learn, be excited about the AI revolution, and so on. As you can imagine, we're doing a lot of work helping clients change, adopt AI, and rethink the processes. And in doing this work, we are finding quite a lot of resistance from the employees on how to learn these new ways of working, how to make sure that AI is being used in the right way. So at Pearson, in a more practical way, how are you bringing your people along? How do you make sure that they learn this new technology in the right way?
Yeah, as you know, that is a very tough question. I'm going to give you how we're approaching it, and I'll try and give you some proof points of how it's working so far in Pearson, but also importantly for our customers. In Pearson, we've got histories of learning science and neuroscience and behavioral science. We understand actually how people learn. And the gap between not knowing something and knowing something is learning. And learning requires friction and effort. And if you say to someone, hey, you need to go and do this course in the middle of your extremely busy day job where you may be doing 50, 60 hours a week, it's a hard ask. So you have to be super clear about why it's good for them. Mm-hmm. So we have this framework that we call the deep learning framework, slightly tongue-in-cheek, because deep learning for humans. D for diagnose, E for embed, E for evaluate, and P for prioritize. So firstly, you need to be able to know which skills matter in your business. Mm-hmm. Most companies do not. There's a signaling failure between companies and potential recruits about what skills they need. And companies need to be able to diagnose what skills they have and need to be able to measure that. So how you measure in quite a forensic way for the roles of today and the roles of tomorrow, what skills you really need, and how you measure that, what you have today and what you're going to need tomorrow. That diagnosis is a very important thing. And so we have a set of tools for that. Then you need to embed learning in the flow of work. You can't take someone out of their job and send them to a classroom, whether it's online or physical, and then hope that they will imbue the knowledge. Actually, we know for a fact that the attrition of knowledge goes down really steeply unless you put it to work immediately. So you have to deliver the knowledge as a package of knowledge as part of what you're actually doing. So if you're a cybersecurity analyst sitting in a cybersecurity operations center, you want the learning to pop up in the flow of work and tell you what you need to do. And we have examples of that we're doing with some of the tech companies. Then you need to actually evaluate your knowledge. One of the failings of past learning and development techniques is it was simply a content presentation or a check that you consumed a course. It didn't actually check your knowledge. You need to be able to candidly give people true feedback on what they did, and then provide transparency and results of like how's their progress on the knowledge relative to the population and relative to what you need. People are very motivated by that. And then you need to prioritize, which is help people understand what skills they have and help them make good choices about what skills they need for the future to progress in the career architecture of your business. And you can capture that through skills in the wallet that they carry with them, which describes their skills. And you can give them the next best learning, the next best training, and the next best career paths to develop themselves. And that's the deep learning approach that we take. Last year Pearson signed 10 large contracts with some of the world's biggest technology companies in the world to help them help their people on these things. So it's like, how do I help my sellers learn our AI so we can sell our technology better? How do I help my ecosystem of partners learn our new technology so they can propagate it into the wider world? And how do we help our customers use our technology better so that they get more value from it to accelerate this AI ROI? And so that's the heart of what we're working on.
That's fascinating. I have a difficult question. I'm assuming that you tested Pearson on the framework. What did you find out when you used the framework on yourself?
I mean, so as I said, there are many different angles to this. So there's some top-down aspects of this. So I put our top executive committee through a prompt engineering course at the very beginning of 2025, a multi-week course, so that they all became very adept at this. And then what I found is that, for example, my CFO was pushing this hard throughout the whole finance organization so that they're starting to work with agents. We rolled out things like Microsoft Copilot and a whole set of other tools. I think we've got over 1,000 engineers now running on Claude Code and Cursor to develop our products and services. So you have a kind of a bottom-up effect happening as well. We enable employee professional networks to help them think hard about sharing learning and best practices. We create virtual teams across different groups to, again, propagate what works and what doesn't work. And so what I found happens is you have junior people in HR who will pop up and say, do you know what? We've implemented this new career architecture that I spoke to you about, but our people still don't quite know what does it mean for them. What does it mean for their current role, expectations in the role, what training they can do to progress. So one of the young ladies in HR literally went and built Kara, Career Architecture Agent. Kara is now available in our Teams window inside the company where any employee can go and click and say, for my role, what do I need to do to progress? And what can I learn? And where can I get that learning? And it's just an agent that's been built inside the company, which is bringing some of the elements of the D.E.E.P framework into practice in Pearson. And so all of those steps of D.E.E.P that I mentioned earlier, our HR team actually is working in a beautiful partnership with technology. So the CTO-CHRO partnership is a critical enabler to allow the CEO to be a chief learning officer. And that's a lot of what we're doing right now.
And so far, what do you think are the biggest gaps that you see in the organization that you're trying to address with this learning journey?
It's always, for me, it's always human. What you'll find in any team, whether it's in the software engineering teams who are in the heart of the frontier of what all this AI can do, or whether it's in a finance team or an HR team or a sales team or a marketing team, I always find that the group seems to bifurcate into two types of person. There are some people who are extremely wedded to how the role was done, and they have a set of priors that are built into how they think. And actually, it's the source of their expertise. And they sometimes find it hard to latch on to completely new ways of doing things. And there are other people who are obsessed with the novelty and the amazingness of these new technologies, and they just lean into it and experiment and play with it in a kind of fear-free way. And those people can literally dramatically multiply their productivity and their capability. And I think as CEOs, we have to bring both groups along with us. There isn't a choice of saying, well, I'm going to just drop a whole load of people and find them out in the market. They don't exist. So it's how do you not end up with two tiers of folks across all the functions, across all the units, where you spread the enthusiasm and the energy and the excitement of the group who've got it, and help bring the others along. And I think that's quite a delicate piece of work.
And then as a CEO of Pearson, you are continuously learning yourself. And I'm assuming that you are front and center in showing how AI is changing your role as well. Tell us about how you're using AI in your daily life.
From a personal point of view at work, I use AI as a devil's advocate to challenge me. The problem sometimes with when you're senior in a company is you won't always hear exactly what you need to hear. I mean, we could joke about it, but like, the news traveling up the company sort of improves until it gets to me when it's perfect. We're perfect. And of course, that can't be true. And so AI is actually a very good way of testing like some of the more dramatic things that I want to work on, or some of the more nerve-wracking things around the strategy. And so when I want to make a push on something that would be quite meaningful, I'll tell the AI to poke holes at it and tell me like why I'm wrong, and like go and search the web to find sources to prove that I'm wrong. So that can be a very good way, just as having a counterpart, to help you think through what you want to get done. Those are a couple of the cases I use.
So Omar, you have been CEO of Pearson for now over 2 years. How has this experience changed you as a person and as a leader?
Like many of your audience, I've been an operating executive for a long time, and those roles are like hyper intense and they're full on. And as you know, 70, 80-hour weeks is very normal, and your diary is like jammed. Sort of coming into this role, I realized that I had to create time and space to be more thoughtful about things that would genuinely affect the destiny of the company, the destiny of a lot of people, that I had to take that super seriously. So I work really hard to create space at the beginning of every day before about 10 a.m. To allow me to read, write, and think and not talk to anyone. And that has been very, very important for me, I think, in the journey so far. And actually, I'm advocating it to all of my executive committee, that I think leaders are more effective when they are prepared. If you're constantly fighting fires, if you're constantly running on the hamster wheel, sure, I mean, you can crank out decisions at a rate, but sometimes, they may not be that good, and they certainly won't be prioritized. You won't be anchoring your time on the things that are most important unless you actually take the time to figure out what is most important. So that's sort of one area that I think I'm changing quite a bit on. Another one, which is perhaps a bit more personal, is, people had given me feedback before I came into this role that I'm naturally quite a collaborative person and that I seek consensus. It's true. I like to get the best of all the brains and crowdsource the thinking and bring everyone together. What I found in this role is that sometimes that caused confusion. Because, and I've had this feedback from my team, which is that sometimes people couldn't tell when had I actually just made a decision anyway, and it sounded like I was chatting to people, versus when did I genuinely want input. And so it's forcing me to be much crisper in discussions with the team about when I'm like, listen, folks, this is the decision, I want you to go and do it, versus I think this is the decision, I need your guidance, versus I'm totally wide open, let's go where it's going to go, and like help me get data driven so we make good choices. And that kind of balance between collaborative decision making versus directive decision making is something that I think I'm being forced to be more clear about.
That's so good. I will definitely copy those best practices. I think the first one is very hard to do, but it's important for everybody. I'm a big believer that we do too many meetings. So trying to block the calendar is so important. Thanks for sharing these personal learnings. Now, to close out, I have some rapid fire questions for you. So just tell us the first thing that comes to mind. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Keep in mind, I'm Italian.
Yeah.
So these questions have some personal connotation. Okay? Ready?
Ready.
Great. Favorite cuisine?
Okay, don't be offended. Asian fusion.
I am offended. Your go-to coffee order?
Doppio macchiato. Double macchiato.
When?
Many, many times throughout the day.
Okay. In Italy, you can only do that in the morning.
I know.
Never in the afternoon.
I know. Yeah.
Favorite book or podcast that you have read or listened to recently that you recommend?
I'm a fan of the Hard Fork and the Dwarkesh podcasts, but the last book I finished is The Art of a Good Life.
And then your favorite productivity hack?
I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, the short answer is sleep. I think I try really hard to protect a good number of hours. It makes an enormous, enormous difference. But as I said to you earlier, I try hard not to take any meetings before 10 a.m., which gives me reading, writing, and gym time. And all of that energizes me and gets me set for the day, so then when I'm with people, I can be more effective and more useful to them.
Omar, thank you so much for being part of Bold Moves in TMT. This was extremely insightful and interesting, and I really learned a lot from you.
Thank you so much.